To uncover the truth, Ben travels to Cuba to investigate. Following Cal's hand-drawn sketch, Ben locates the fishing boat that salvaged the plane's tail fin. However, as soon as Ben steps on board, he feels dizzy. Then he receives a message from Michaela and Cal. They too have received the same calling. In the calling, their bodies glow as they clutch their ears in apparent pain. Ben then finds the boat's captain and pays a hefty sum to buy the wreckage of the plane's tail fin. But he was still stunned when he saw the tail fin in front of him, which was indeed the tail fin of Flight 828, the flight he was traveling on. Just as he reaches out to touch the wreckage, he sees a vision of them struggling in pain. Then is thrown 10 meters away and loses consciousness. When Ben wakes up, he realizes things are more complicated than they seem and calls Vance to help transport the wreckage back for further study. Since accidentally killing the Major, a terrified Sanvi has turned to Vance for help. Vance uses his connections to secretly dispose of the body and instructs Sanvi to keep the incident a secret. With the threat from the Major now eliminated, Vance returns to his position as director of the NSA and resumes the investigation into the mysteries of Flight 828. Meanwhile, Zeke, having survived his death date, is back to normal and currently enjoying a honeymoon with Michaela. At this point, Michaela receives another beckon. And Michaela feels that she, too, is a passenger on Flight 828. As if she is in danger, she asks Cal to check the passenger list and, sure enough, they find someone resembling Angelina. As it happens, Angelina's home is in the same city where Michaela is vacationing, so she and Zeke rush to her house. But when talking to her parents about Angelina, they get impatient and say that Angelina is paranoid all the time and has been away from home for months. Right then, Michaela receives another beckon. Though it passes quickly, she clearly sees Angelina locked in a small dark room. Michaela excuses herself to use the bathroom, sneaks around the house, and finally discovers Angelina in a small basement room, preparing to commit suicide. It turns out that Angelina had been tormented by her callings and was deemed unstable by her parents, who locked her away. Michaela then takes her to Ben's house, where she will be safe. But soon after, something terrifying happens. 3 months ago, the bodies of the 3 criminals who fell into the icy lake with Cal were never found. At that moment, the criminals who had fallen into the lake 84 days ago suddenly resurfaced. These same criminals, whose bodies had been missing, had now come back to life, and their return would bring an even greater threat. It didn't take long for Michaela to receive the message. Michaela felt bad and rushed to inform Ben.
They're alive again. The 3 guys who kidnapped Cal.
Worried that Cal might be targeted for revenge, Ben arranged for Grace to take Cal to her brother's rural home to hide. According to the theory that the time of death equals the time of resurrection, they believed that if they could survive the 84 days of the criminal's death date, they would be safe. Michaela then headed to the lake to track the criminals' movements. It wasn't long before she found a couple who had been attacked by the criminals, who had stolen their RV. Michaela followed the trail and soon spotted the criminals' vehicle, but they noticed her as well. The criminals threw a gas canister at Michaela's vehicle, and though she tried to swerve, she crashed into it. Fortunately, no one was seriously hurt. Meanwhile, the 3 criminals began to argue. Pete believed that their resurrection was a second chance at life, and that they shouldn't go back to their old ways.
And I don't think that we should be beating people up and firebombing the cops.
I don't give a rat's ass about any of those people.
Hey, maybe that's why we came back. To do things differently.
But Jace ignores Pete's words and goes straight to an ice cream parlor ready to get some money. Pete tried to convince Jace once more, but his words fell on deaf ears. Corey followed Jace, but their presence was soon noticed by the police. Michaela received the alert and rushed to the scene. Just as Jace was about to make his escape, a strange voice suddenly echoed in all 3 of their minds. Pete, in pain, noticed a photograph on the ground. As he stared at it, he became lost in thought. At that moment, the police sound. Jace hurriedly shouted to Pete to get into the car and run away.
This girl, I think I'm supposed to go to her.
But Pete didn't follow Jace and Corey. He stood there, fixated on the photo in his hand. Soon Michaela arrives and arrests Pete without incident. When she questioned him, Pete remained silent, staring at the photo. At that moment, Michaela's niece and Angelina showed up, revealing that Angelina had dropped that very photo just minutes earlier. When Angelina tried to take the photo, Pete became visibly upset.
That photo belongs to me.
No, it's mine. I dropped it.
How could you have a picture of me?
This is a picture of me. Right there, I was 10 years old.
And that boy staring at the girl with the slushie? Staring at you? That's me.
It turned out that the two had crossed paths 10 years ago, back when the innocent young boy had yet to become a fugitive. Fortunately, Pete's conscience wasn't completely lost, and there was hope for him yet. Meanwhile, as Ben was about to go to sleep, he noticed that his left hand was glowing brightly, like a light bulb. He realized that perhaps it had something to do with touching the tail wreckage earlier. So Ben goes to Vance's research lab and touches the tail wreckage again with no response, while the light in his palm illuminates from time to time, as if to guide him. Following the light's lead, he discovered a secret room in the lab's basement. This is the person who died in a shooting 18 months ago, when her body strangely disappeared. Not expecting to be here, it seems Vance is hiding something from him. Meanwhile, the police tracked down the criminal's vehicle, only to find that they had already fled. But the thug is also too crazy, sticking pictures of Michaela's family on the wall, gouging out all their eyes with a knife, and even drawing all sorts of curses on the wall. Michaela hurriedly finds Ben to discuss the countermeasures. Michaela believed that to resolve the crisis, they needed to find the criminals as quickly as possible. She sought help from Pete, hoping to get some information, but he provided no useful leads.
Okay, Pete, I'm gonna need you to focus. I need your help finding Jace and Corey. Where are they?
Take me back to my cell.
So Michaela enlists the help of Angelina, for whom Pete seems to have a special affection, and Angelina does too, but she wasn't able to get much out of Pete either, only learning that the three of them had been receiving the same calling simultaneously. In the calling, they saw a clock counting down, as if it were a warning that their death date was approaching. Meanwhile, Corey began experiencing symptoms of the death date. At this moment, Pete suddenly remembered a clock just like that from his high school football field. He used to play on the team but was kicked off by the coach. Michaela, believing that Pete genuinely wanted to make amends, decided to help him resolve the calling, so came to the field and found the coach to find out what was going on. The coach said the three of them were kicked off the team because they were ostensibly playing football but were actually dumping illegal items and even got a player killed. Michaela believed the coach's story and returned to the police station to confront Pete about causing the player's death. At this moment, Zeke on the side looked like he sensed something. It turns out that ever since he broke the dead period and eliminated the summoning, he gained a special ability to sense the emotions and psychology of others. Zeke senses fear in Pete.
So scared of. Who are you protecting?
Is it Jace?
This calling's giving you a chance to choose a different path in life. Take it and you might survive, Pete.
I never wanted to deal drugs. But I had to if I wanted to stay on the team. Coach Hannity, he made us.
It turns out that the coach threatened to force them to go down this path of no return. It seems that Michaela needs to visit the coach again. At this moment, Jace and Corey have already appeared in front of the coach's house, and Jace wants to seek justice from the coach. Corey tried to talk him out of it, but he couldn't stop Jace's thirst for revenge. By the time Michaela arrived, she found Corey lying on the ground, shot in the leg, while Jace was nowhere to be seen. The coach continued to protest his innocence, but with Corey's help, Michaela discovered a stash of illegal items hidden in the air vent. On the other side, Ben discovered Kelly's frozen body and demanded answers from Director Vance. Vance then revealed everything. Although Kelly died from a gunshot wound to the head, the autopsy revealed that her injuries were consistent with those sustained by victims of the plane explosion. Additionally, a type of seaweed unique to the Cuban waters was found in her tissue. This same seaweed was also discovered on the wreckage of the plane's tail.
We died on that plane. We were resurrected.
Vance then showed Ben a video in which the tail section of the plane mysteriously vanished into thin air. But the strangest part was the timestamp on the footage. This occurred on the same day that Jace and his two friends fell into the icy lake. Zeke broke his death date, and Sanvi accidentally killed the Major. It seemed like all of this was beyond scientific explanation. Could the mystery surrounding these events ever be unraveled? Meanwhile, Pete and Corey, who had been on the run, were both captured and genuinely expressed remorse. As the days passed, the 83rd day approached, yet Michaela still hadn't apprehended the fugitive Jace. Corey claimed he didn't know Jace's whereabouts, but every day Jace remained at large. More innocent lives were at risk. At that moment, Corey and Pete both received a calling showing Jace in a pitch-black forest, attempting to kill Michaela. This forest was the very spot where they had all been resurrected by the lake. Upon hearing this, Michaela and Zeke rushed to the forest to search for Jace, unaware that danger was closing in on them. When Michaela turned around, she realized that Zeke had suddenly disappeared. The scene changes and Zeke has been knocked unconscious to the ground. With no sign of Zeke, Michaela mustered her courage and continued searching. As dawn began to break, Michaela was still unable to find Jace. At that moment, Jace attacked from behind, kicking Michaela to the ground, just as he was about to shoot her. It was as if Cal's words echoed in Jace's mind. Taking advantage of his hesitation, Michaela scrambled to her feet and fought back. Jace grabbed her by the hair and hurled her over a cliff. Using Michaela's police car, Jace then discovered Cal's hiding place and drove straight there. On the other side, Pete senses the call again.
Please! You don't have to do this!
And to save himself, Pete must go and fulfill the call. Ben secured him a pass, and an agent escorted Pete to Cal's hiding place. As Ben exited the car and called for Grace and the others hiding in the cellar, a gunshot rang out, and the agent fell to the ground. Ben quickly took cover, realizing that Jace was stationed on the rooftop. Ben signaled Cal and the others to retreat to the cellar. The gunfire eventually ceased, but as Jace pursued Cal, Ben grabbed the agent's gun and followed, with Pete rushing to stop Jace as well. In the woods, Cal's uncle hurried to the shed to grab a gun to protect his sister and nephew, but Jace caught him before he could open the door. The uncle refused to reveal his nephew's location, ultimately collapsing in a pool of blood. Pete arrives and tries to stop Jace. The two wrestle, but Pete's hands are cuffed. After knocking Pete to the ground, Jace headed straight for the cellar. Inside the cellar, Cal is singing to his sister when he suddenly hears a footstep and sees that the visitor is actually Corey.
I can find you when you do that, right? He can find you.
Grace, seeing her brother injured, was furious and grabbed a hunting rifle to confront Jace. She fired a warning shot, causing Jace to freeze. Hearing the gunshot, everyone rushed to the scene, including Michaela and her team. It turned out that the cliff Michaela had fallen from wasn't high, so she wasn't seriously hurt. At that moment, Jace's death date arrived. Muddy water began spewing from his mouth, and everyone kept their distance. After 99 agonizing seconds, Jace died. Pete and Corey, however, seemed unharmed. The group believed that because they had followed the callings, they were spared from the death date. While everyone was celebrating, a black smoke floated up from Jace's body and then split into two strands towards Pete and Corey. After a burst of black smoke erupted, Pete and Corey also collapsed and died, and the crowd looked at what was in front of them in shock. It was then that Ben realized his previous assumptions were wrong. Could it be that returning together meant being judged together? As a woman pulled back the curtains, she noticed the sky in the distance was unusually turbulent, with thick, rolling smoke swirling like a storm, but her colleagues saw nothing but clear skies. Puzzled, Michaela went to take a closer look and discovered others who also saw the smoke and were approaching it. It turned out they were all passengers from Flight 828. But why was the smoke only visible in that specific area? A short while later, Ben emerged from the building, unaware of the crowd or the strange phenomenon above. Curious, Michaela returned to question Ben. The events with the three brothers had made Ben lose faith in the possibility of self-redemption.
Because suddenly now I have very little faith in us saving ourselves.
He realized that the fates of all 191 passengers seemed intertwined, and if one failed to fulfill a calling, everyone would face judgment when their death dates arrived. Pete and his brothers were a perfect example of this. Ben believed it would be nearly impossible to get all the passengers to follow the callings. Researchers discovered that every surface contains certain chemical elements. When combined, these elements crystallized into sapphire. Whether these sapphires are the cause of Flight 828's disappearance and return remains unclear and requires further research and testing. They are also studying a piece of driftwood that had been buried for 6,000 years, only to be brought to the surface by an earthquake 7 years ago. This earthquake happened on the same day Flight 828 disappeared, and the driftwood also contains sapphire compounds. Sanvi speculates that the driftwood might have come from a ship that was famous for transporting animals and sapphires in history.
Said anything about it being near a dormant volcano, and there's only one dormant volcano in that region, Mount Ararat.
What does that mean to you?
Mount Ararat is believed to be the final resting place of Noah's Ark.
In light of this significant discovery, Vance promotes Sanvi to a Homeland Security agent and instructs her to keep this research confidential. Sanvi reluctantly agrees, which causes a rift in her alliance with Ben, the captain of Flight 828, mentioned encountering black lightning when the plane vanished. So Sanvi attempts to replicate the black lightning in a test on the driftwood. Meanwhile, during a dinner gathering, Michaela suddenly sees herself in the mirror, crying tears of blood with smoke rising from her head. Michaela quickly contacts Ben, who also notices something strange. All the passengers' photos on the wall are dry except for Sanvi's, which is soaking wet. Ben realizes he hasn't spoken to Sanvi in a week, and now her phone is unreachable. Michaela feels that something serious might have happened to Sanvi. At the same time, Sanvi continues to increase the intensity of the simulated black lightning in her experiment on the driftwood, but no effects are observed. However, a colleague notices bloodstains on Sanvi. When Sanvi removes her protective helmet, her colleague is horrified. As doctors are unable to explain her bleeding tears, Michaela arrives and sees Sanvi exactly as she appeared in the vision, while Sanvi reveals she can no longer receive new callings after having nullified her previous ones. It seems that something Sanvi did has led to this punishment, indicating she may be hiding something from them. Doctors are still unable to stop her bleeding tears, and her oxygen levels rapidly drop. At this moment, Ben sees a vision of a lion with tears of blood. Ben understands this to be a story about lies, prompting Michaela to urgently press Sanvi to reveal the truth. Under Michaela's plea, Sanvi finally confesses that she accidentally killed the Major.
It's about a lie. What are you hiding? Sanvi, you don't have to die. You can save yourself right now.
I'm not afraid to die.
And save the rest of us, please.
She realizes that her punishment is a result of hiding this truth. At that very moment, a miracle occurs. Her bleeding tears vanish, and her health returns to normal. Rejuvenated, Sanvi immediately resumes her work, reviewing the slowed-down experiment footage. She discovers that her previous experiment did have an effect. The driftwood had disappeared for 37 milliseconds under the influence of the black lightning before reappearing. This might be a clue to the mystery of Flight 828. Sanvi then increases the intensity of the experiment on the driftwood, but this time, it triggers a much greater disaster. Cal observes a volcano erupting inside the crystal ball. Angelina hears her baby suddenly cry and gets up to check on it. The next moment, the electric fan fell down where she had just been sitting, and if it hadn't been for the baby's cries, she would have been hit. Moments later, the glass windows of the city's buildings shatter, and everything in the room begins to shake. Fortunately, it stops after a few seconds. A shaken Angelina looks at the baby in amazement. Angelina now believes the baby is her guardian angel. Meanwhile, Sanvi's experiment is forced to halt, and they discover that each test coincided with an earthquake. The earlier tremors were too subtle to notice, detected only by instruments, revealing the epicenter was directly beneath the lab. But this time, the epicenter was miles away. There were cracks in the earth there like near a volcano, and the city didn't have a volcano at all. Sanvi realized the gravity of the situation and requested Vance to halt the testing.
To have already been told we are on the brink of something huge. If we stop now, they'll just replace me. Find someone else to do my job. But to me, this is more than just a job. We are closer than we've ever been to figuring out what happened to 828. Can you really stop now because of two possibly unrelated events? Because I can't. So I'm sorry, the answer is no.
However, Vance insisted that the experiment couldn't be stopped at this stage. Reluctantly, Sanvi continued with the experiment, but there was now a subtle change in her expression. As soon as the test began, an explosion occurred, causing Vance to rush over, and Sanvi was quickly taken to the medical room. Injured, Sanvi and her assistant left the lab together. In the car, she took out the driftwood from the lab and headed straight to the volcanic fissure with it. Knowing that the driftwood was originally found near a volcano, Sanvi realized the volcano wanted to reclaim what was rightfully its own. Otherwise, it would unleash an even greater disaster. After a moment of hesitation, Sanvi threw the driftwood into the fissure. Moments later, the lava vanished, and the volcano in Cal's crystal ball returned to normal. Meanwhile, Angelina, determined to prove that the baby was indeed her guardian angel, did something even more extreme. She held a candle flame to her hand, burning her palm, to see how the baby would save her. As the smell of burning flesh filled the room, the fallen candle suddenly ignited the curtains. Angelina, instead of panicking, muttered something to herself.
Behold, an angel will guard you.
At that moment, Zeke, who was downstairs, sensed something was wrong.
Eden, she's scared.
When Grace arrived upstairs, the room was filled with smoke, and she quickly grabbed her daughter. Zeke rushed in with a fire extinguisher to put out the flames. Angelina frantically tried to explain herself as she followed Grace. Grace couldn't believe that Angelina had deliberately done such a thing. Fearing for her daughter's safety, Grace decided to throw Angelina out of the house. At this point, Cal pleads with his mom. Despite this, Grace remained resolute in her decision to expel Angelina from their home. However, in an unexpected twist, Cal secretly hid Angelina in his room, a decision that would later lead to an even greater crisis. Meanwhile, Ben was overwhelmed by the constant callings and, after losing faith in his ability to find redemption, his mindset began to shift. One day, while helping another passenger fulfill a calling, Ben acted impulsively in his desperation to save them. He tied the person up and, in his agitation, pushed them to the ground, causing them to lose consciousness. This incident landed Ben in jail. Coincidentally, the government had recently implemented harsh policies against Flight 828 passengers, leading to many of them being arrested on dubious charges. Ben's actions further exacerbated the public scrutiny on all 828 passengers. Grace was forced to mortgage the house to pay the $500,000 bail to get Ben released. Just then, they received another calling. Everyone seemed to be undergoing a trial by fire, with Cal experiencing the strongest effects. His skin turned red in large patches, as if he had been burned. After drawing a picture, Cal left home with Angelina. On the other hand, Sanvi returns to the research room after dealing with the driftwood and finds Vance and the others doing black lightning tests on the tail. Given that a small piece of driftwood had already caused a disaster, Sanvi was deeply concerned about the potential consequences of experimenting on such a large piece of wreckage. She tried to convince Vance to stop the testing, but Vance had already discovered that Sanvi had taken the driftwood. Learning that the driftwood had been destroyed, Vance used this as grounds to fire Sanvi. Sanvi then went directly to the police station, intending to atone for the accidental killing of the major. At the same time, Michaela was called into her superior's office. Due to the growing government bias against Flight 828 passengers, Michaela was temporarily reassigned to a desk job.
A passenger has just been executed. More are being brought in every single day. My own brother is being targeted, and now my value to this force is being erased.
Unable to tolerate such prejudice, Michaela resigned on the spot. She then took Sanvi to Ben's house, understanding that if Sanvi were to turn herself in now, she would face an unjust trial. Meanwhile, halfway through separating from Angelina, Cal actually goes straight to Vance's research lab. He just touched the tail wreckage and the next second he just disappeared in place. It turned out that Cal had snuck into the lab the night before to stop Vance and his team. According to the callings, Cal only knew that the Tailfin could not remain here, or something serious would happen. However, the intensity of the callings had caused severe burns on Cal's body. Upon learning of this, Ben and Grace urgently called Sanvi, as they trusted only her to treat Cal. Although Vance agreed to stop the testing at Ben's request, Ben believed that the only way to completely eliminate the threat was to destroy the Tailfin. But the situation was far more complicated than he had anticipated. Just as he was about to destroy the plane's Tailfin while no one was around, he suddenly sensed another calling. In the calling, he wakes up in the deep sea and sees the Tailfin slowly sinking to the ocean floor, unaware that Cal beside him is also sinking. When Ben realizes this, he rushes to save Cal. At that moment, he returns to reality and discovers that his palm is glowing like a light bulb again, and the wounds on Cal's body are exhibiting the same phenomenon. It finally dawns on Ben.
It's a drawing. We don't need to destroy the Tailfin. We need to return it.
Ben believes they need to return the Tailfin to the area where it was salvaged, but this presents a major problem for Vance. The Tailfin is a valuable asset to the government and the entire world, crucial for the research into Flight 828, with significant progress about to be made. Even if Vance agrees, the government would never approve. As everyone argues, Cal does something unexpected. Cal suddenly rushes toward the Tailfin, which is being tested, and disappears in an instant. No one knows where he went. Seeing this, Vance is moved with compassion. From the beginning, he had witnessed the mysterious power of the callings. He now promises to find a way to bring Cal back, even if it means disobeying his superiors. So, Vance secretly arranges for a cargo ship to let Ben and the others transport the Tailfin away. The ship arrives at the destination smoothly, but the skies ahead are filled with dark clouds, thunder, and lightning. Ben wants to position the ship directly under the storm clouds, but the captain is unwilling to take the risk and approach recklessly. While Ben argues with the captain, Sanvi runs onto the deck alone. She presses the hoist switch, lowering the Tailfin, and despite Ben's warnings, she grabs an axe and hacks at the rope several times. At the very last stroke, it plunged into the sea with its human body due to inertia. At the same time, the rear wing also fell into the sea, just on top of Sanvi. Seeing this, Ben quickly jumps in after her. As he watches the Tailfin sinking, a burst of golden light suddenly appears, and then the Tailfin vanishes. Ben then rescues the unconscious Sanvi, and fortunately, she is unharmed. At that moment, he and Sanvi both experience a calling and find themselves on a plane together.
Stop getting the callings. Does this mean that I'm
Redeemed. It just might.
Ben notices that there is only one person sitting on the otherwise empty plane. As he approaches, he realizes it's Cal. But Cal, in a daze, tells Ben that there may still be a chance. Just then, Michaela also appears on the plane. She spots a pool of blood on the floor and follows the trail to seat 24, which is Angelina's seat. At this moment, Angelina is quietly sneaking into Cal's house. She heads directly to Grace's room upstairs.
I need my guardian angel.
Meanwhile, while Cal from the summoning disappears, one person appears in Grace's room. Grace, lying in a pool of blood and barely conscious, finally recognizes the person. That's right, this person is Cal. He has regained the 5.5 years he lost and has grown into a tall, handsome young man. Elsewhere, in the research lab, a female scientist is just about to leave for the day when she discovers that someone has appeared out of nowhere within the wreckage of the plane. It's the captain of Flight 828, and he seems to be terrified by something. The scientist is left alone at the scene, utterly bewildered. And with that, the story of Season 3 comes to an end.